In this video, we're going to take a look at managing system development. And really what we're talking about typically when it comes to managing system development is more about the IT side of system development. And although we look at managing development projects kind of in the planning phase of the system development lifecycle, the management of projects spans the entirety of the system development lifecycle. Just sort of makes sense to look at them in the early phases because, well, quite frankly, that's when project management begins. So, of course, as we've learned previously in the planning phase, we go through a fact-finding process. We present the results of that fact-finding progress to management. There may be some sort of baseline project plan that's developed. And if the project is kind of approved or folks decide to move forward in the development of an information system, then there's additional sorts of documentation that may come as a result of this. And quite frankly, the names of these types of documentation doesn't matter too much. What you see here are examples of a project scope statement, a project charter. They serve very similar purposes, and different organizations call these things by different names. But overall, there's some sort of formal agreement as to here's what we are going to do. And so, with project management, we then move into thinking about exactly what the plan for developing this system is going to be. Project management, just broadly speaking, whether that's in information system development or in really any sort of project a business is undergoing, has four main phases: initiation, planning, execution, and close down. So initiation kind of being the preliminary stuff, and we experienced that when we were looking at preliminary fact finding. Planning here kind of has to do with planning the management of the process of developing an information system. Execution being developing the system per the plan, and close down having to do with some particular procedures and best practices as development wraps up. There's one overarching kind of consideration throughout the entirety of project management, and that is a little something we like to call the project triangle. And as any good triangle does have, the project triangle has three sides. And these are three sort of related but competing interests when we're developing a system. The first of those being cost. The second being the scope of the project. And the third being time. Ideally, when we are planning for a development project, we have thought through the particulars and have kind of come to some harmony in respect to making sure that we have the right budget for things, that we have the appropriate time allocated, and that the scope is going to be that which addresses some sort of solution for the problem that's been identified. Now, throughout a project, of course, as much as we may plan and anticipate and investigate, things don't always work out the way that we planned. So, for example, and this is where the project triangle gives us a visual tool to think through how to navigate project management. So if, for example, it ends up that the cost of a project is much more significant than we expected, then there has to be some sort of sacrifice from one of the other two remaining parts of the triangle. So in this example, given the same scope, well, obviously, this is going to take much longer. And as time needs to be extended, well, the scope isn't going to change, but in order to maintain the same scope, as I've extended that here, you can see that even more time may be required just based on originally cost going up. So finding that kind of perfect balance between cost, scope, and time can be particularly challenging. And as another example, if it turns out that the scope of a project is going to be more than was originally anticipated. As we start to develop this information system, it turns out there are additional aspects of the problem we identified or the solution that we're developing. So in order to accommodate for scope, well, then there's going to be adjustments in both cost and time in order to then appropriately meet that sense of scope. Or do we just kind of keep scope the way it is and realize, well, we only have so many time and budgetary resources. So the primary challenge in project management is finding the optimal balance amongst the factors. That is, we can't have scope that's going to be met within a particular cost budget and within the time frame that we expect. That is very unlikely, but a project manager will do their best to balance many different aspects of the project, from the development lifecycle itself and how we go through the phases, time and resource constraints, the people, the customer, and management expectations, how we're documenting things, how we're communicating, methodology and tools, technological challenges, organizational change and complexity, contract and vendors, and holy wow, there are a lot of things that a project manager has to juggle in order to properly manage balance of all of those different, or I should say, of each of those three sides of the project triangle. In other words, it's nearly impossible. It's nearly impossible. So project managers tend to need a lot of previous experience prior to coming into the project management role, having worked on many different development projects across their career, to then be able to really kind of accurately think through the particulars of how to balance out that triangle. So, some aspects here that are important has to do with project duration and thinking through how long a project should take. So a project manager will identify all of the project tasks and the time that's required for each, and consider the time taken for the sorts of events that can affect productivity. So project size, huge part of project duration, as is human resources. Project manager needs to assemble and guide a development team that has the appropriate skills for the project and deal with and hopefully be able to navigate factors that could affect the project's timeline. So as I said earlier, experience with other projects similar to the one that is under development is incredibly beneficial for project managers, and over time they can learn to estimate and plan based on what they've done in the past. It's important up front to define exactly kind of what the requirements are and what can be achieved realistically within time and budgetary constraints. As part of this, project resources will calculate kind of what they need to do with the absence of constraint. For example, coming up with a PERT or critical path diagram, such as what we have here. And this is kind of just a simple example showing in the early stages of project management, putting together kind of an estimation as to how long each of the key tasks will take. And this is not all of the tasks, but rather a critical path is one that we map out. And these are the key activities where a delay in any one of these is going to cause a delay later on in the process of developing the information system. There's loads of different project management software out there that allow for project managers to sort of manage things in terms of ending and start dates, which tasks are dependent on other ones, and ultimately being able to come up with a Gantt or a network diagram. And quite simply, those are software tools that allow us to visualize different responsibilities, the cost of different tasks and activities, as well as their expected start and completion dates. Agile teams in particular use software such as Trello or other sorts of software that kind of follow this thing called Kanban, which is where you have a backstock as well as what we have to do, what we're doing, and what we've completed to kind of keep everyone on the right schedule to ensure that we're getting the right things done. As part of project management, we have risk management, where we develop a plan, reviewing the project scope, the stakeholders, the budget, the schedule, and anything else that might affect the project in a negative or an unexpected way. So we define project roles and responsibilities, different categories of risks, contingency plans in case something happens. Having well thought through alternatives in advance can save a lot of headaches later on. Part of risk management, and perhaps arguably the most important part, is identifying the risks and listing them all and the likelihood that it could affect the project in terms of scope, in terms of time, in terms of budget. Then analyzing those risks. That is kind of evaluating the risks and estimating the probabilities that these will occur and what sort of impact they will have. And then kind of working through the quantitative aspect. That is, how many days could it put us behind? How many dollars would that cost? How much quality may decline if, in fact, some of these risks do occur. And then how we're going to respond to the risks that happen. Coming up with action plans to deal with risks, whether that is addressing something that's critical by outsourcing the risk, or having a contingency plan, mitigating risk, or even just accepting that these things may happen and we'll just sort of deal with them as they come. That's known as acceptance. Throughout the process, the project manager continues to monitor kind of where we are in relation to that overall plan. There are risk management softwares that allow managers to assign specific dates and constraints to track progress, to make sure that we've kept up with task dependencies, and so on and so forth. That is stuff that helps us with monitoring where we are in the plan, documentation on external factors, and, probably displaying in red or some kind of critical indicator for when tasks are behind schedule, so the team can do their best to catch up and, for the scope, stay on time and stay on budget. So folks, that was a very quick run through of what we have for project management in this class. There are other classes in the MIS curriculum that go much deeper into project management. So this is really kind of an overall look at it within the system development lifecycle. So having these basic background details are very helpful to have in mind as we continue on through the next phases. Thanks for watching.